Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good afternoon to the Academia Library and Resource Center. For those who are joining us online, we wish to bid you welcome. Academia Library is situated in Cape Town, South Africa. It is an independent library that is basically publicly endowed with public contributions, etc. The Academia Library, for those who do not know or are not familiar with the Academia Library, it is a few individuals that came together some 3 decades ago and started an Islamic library. Academia Library is the result of hard work, dedication, but I think it is mostly the endowment of dedicated people who made sure that books will be on the shelves and will be readily available for people to come and join. We also have a resource studio. We have a multimedia studio, fully fledged. We have the library and research discussions taking place here. And very soon we have a lineup of programs that will be taking place. So we will keep you updated via our newsletter as well as social media as to what is still to come. Today is the second session in our Ramadan series talks. Today we have a special guest who will be dealing with the subject on befriending Ramadan, generosity, gentleness, balance. It's none other than Professor Sadiyya Shaikh. And Professor Sadiyya Shaikh, I think my first interaction with Prof was with the launch of her book, Sufi Narratives, I think sometime back in 2012, 2013. Brilliant work. I think it has gone into the second edition already. Professor Sadiyya is she's an associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the UCT, University of Cape Town. She has special interest in Sufism and its implication for Islamic feminism and feminist theory. And her areas of research also include gender-sensitive reading of hadith, Quranic exegesis, and Sufi text, theoretical and political debates on Islam and feminism. I think one of the things for me personally is the bringing about of what we do not understand, or sometimes what we fear in a patriarchal scenario. And very seldom do we have, or are we given the type of understanding as to the work that Professor Sadiyya Shaikh is doing. I do not want to talk too much about it because I'm going to leave that over to our guest speaker. The other thing that afterwards we will have Q&A, and we're going to have questions and answers to the professor. And also for those who are watching online, feel free to post your questions and we will log it and we will hand it over to our guest, and she will answer those questions for you as brief or as explicit as possible. I will not delay any further. I will now call upon Professor Sadiyya Shaikh to take the floor.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you all for coming on a long weekend. It's wonderful to see you here, and it's lovely to have an intimate audience, actually. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم. O human being, what has deceived you concerning your Lord, the Generous? Ramadan Kareem, we have begun and completed half of the sacred and holy time of Ramadan, the month of divine generosity, a month where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has flung the doors of heavens wide open and chained the gates of hell. A period where believers are encouraged to increase their giving and their generosity, following the sunnah of our beloved Prophet, who was described as becoming more generous than a swift wind during Ramadan. A month where the Qur'an al-Kareem, the bountiful sacred words, descended with all of its largest into the heart of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A month that is gifted to us by our sustainer, whose divine name Al-Kareem, Al-Akram, is the source and the origin of all generosity found in the earth and the heavens, within ourselves and between one another. So we give loving and enthusiastic salutations to this month and to one another in this time of rahmah, of deep compassion and mercy. I offer to you today that one of the most meaningful ways to embody the spirit of generosity in Ramadan is to engage it with gentleness and compassion, as though it was a dear visiting friend. And what do I mean by this? Perhaps it might be helpful to first outline what we need to steer away from. Befriending Ramadan, I suggest, means that we do not create a crushing list of things that we must do during this month and set up exhausting, inflexible expectations of ourselves, and then feel overwhelmed, inadequate, and anxious and frustrated with ourselves that we are unable to fulfill these, wishing we had more hours in the day, rushing around doing things without real presence and consciousness. Rather, I would encourage each of us to reflect on what it might take for us to approach Ramadan as a month of compassion, breathing its generosity into our very pores, enabling us to inhale the breath of the merciful, the Nafasur Rahman, more fully. How can we envision this as a capacious month that creates space and abundance and opportunity for us to blossom, rather than making us feel overstretched? Now let me clarify, I don't mean we must relax and chill into Ramadan at all. In fact, Ramadan is indeed a time of beautiful intensity. But that intensity can be embraced gently and lovingly. And I'm suggesting that the way in which we might best enter that space is through an ethos of friendship. Good friends nurture, sustain, and support and enhance one another's growth and spiritual life. Friends are also honest, discerning, and indeed caringly corrective. Friendship is a mode of intimacy and knowing, nestled in loving care. Let us remember that one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the friend, Ya Wali. Ya Wali, the guardian friend, pointing us to the insight that friendship entails protective care. And how might we imagine a month as an opportunity to engage with this quality of divine friendship? What might we do to become better friends with our Creator is a question we each need to ask ourselves. The Qur'an also describes those that have attained closeness to Allah as awliya, the friends of Allah, those who will not fear nor will they grieve. Let us just sit briefly with the idea that those who are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are described as the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That such a relationship of reciprocity and mutual engagement is the model form of relationship with Allah, is a powerful teaching for us. It enables us to deepen a connection with the matrix of a loving relationship with Allah rather than seeing it purely as a vertical relationship. Let us remember that the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu salam, that first monotheist in the Qur'an, who is our spiritual ancestor, was described as Khalilullah, the intimate friend of God. How we see Allah actually often reflects how we see ourselves and vice versa. The Qur'an also tells us in Surah 9, verse 71, that believing men and believing women are awliya to one another, protecting friends of one another, who together collectively encourage the good and urge towards goodness and prevent evil. That's an ideal model of relationship between believers. Suffice to say that there is so much within our tradition that advocates for thinking of friendship as spiritually ripe and a vivifying or an enlivening way of engaging with our Creator, with our Prophet, with our partners, and indeed our tradition. So I reflect on what it means to befriend ourselves and indeed befriend Ramadan. To start with, I believe that we should locate this friendship and caretaking by creating space to just take stock of where we are as individuals and as a community. I think we need to give a collective exhale, recognizing that we've come through a harrowing 2 years that has left its mark on our being. And if we are to engage with this month with full presence, we need a conscious recognition of where we're at and what we're emerging through, and some of us are still busy within. A number of us have lost dear, loved family members, colleagues, friends, and we've confronted death and its unpredictability with an unprecedented starkness for many of us. While we say Alhamdulillah in the face of all things, and we seek to surrender to Allah, recognizing the full reality that indeed, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that we are constantly, each of us, returning in each moment with each breath. Nonetheless, the concentrated nature of our experience over this pandemic period, the intensity and the constriction produced by it, and the psychological and emotional toll, and indeed the spiritual toll, should not be underestimated or overlooked. Despite our deepest desire for tawakkul and for acceptance of all things, we are indeed frail and vulnerable human beings who have struggled. In fact, in my own layperson's opinion, I think that many of us might actually be experiencing a collective PTSD, a collective trauma. And it's important to recognize this and how it's impacted our health. This recognition, I'm suggesting, is vital as we kind of journey through this month, since mental health is linked to spiritual health. We cannot bypass distress and go into Ramadan 5th year spiritually. My point, beloved community, to you and to myself, is that before we put a whole set of rigorous expectations on ourselves for heightened discipline, intensified worship, and spiritual receptivity, it's necessary to start with some space and time focused on where we are at, and then consciously, with deep compassion, kindness, and honesty, turn our attention inward, recognize where we've traveled, celebrate the things we've coped with actually, and then try to the best of our ability to discern our own negative behaviors, or where we might have produced dysfunctional coping mechanisms even. In this regard, there's a lot of evidence that lockdown produced an intense cooking pot of strain in many families. Many of us will admit that it's not normal or healthy to spend so much non-stop periods of time with your husband or your wife or your partner or your family members. There's bickering, there's irritation, and just being saturated with being 24/7 in somebody's presence. And it doesn't for a minute mean that you don't love them. It's just not normal to spend that much time with even the people that we love dearly. On the other hand, for many other people, COVID was an intensely lonely period. It was fraught with isolation and depriving many people of the basic social connections that we've needed. All of this simply to acknowledge that we've been through, and if we're tired and weary and struggling with depression or anxiety and other mental health challenges, it's not unusual. And in fact, it's to be expected. As such, I want to encourage each of us to extend self-compassion and loving kindness to ourselves in ways that we can do quite easily for a friend. Many of us are much better at being kind and compassionate to our friends, but can be very harsh on ourselves. I want to encourage each of us to seek the support we need to redress any emotional or psychological strain we're experiencing, whether it's simply having a conversation with friends that we trust, or seeking the advice or the ear of a wise elder in our family or in our community, or seeking a counselor if that's possible, or actually doing some research online where there are some amazing techniques for self-help to manage anxiety or depression that are available. Emotional and psychological health are intimately linked to our spiritual health, and indeed, spiritual health impacts positively on one's emotional and psychological life. So being generous and restorative with oneself in the aftermath of what we've endured and are enduring is an important part of establishing the mizan, or the balance. Now, diving into the generosity offered by the month, I'd like to focus on one core Quranic teaching, the one that simply tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than our jugular veins. This relationship of intense intimacy with our Creator is a trust, an amana. We've been gifted with it. It constitutes the very essence of our being. We are each embedded in the womb of divine mercy, always, constantly, with every breath. In the same way that we were each nestled and intimately nurtured in the wombs of our mothers, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of the most personal, intimate, individual, distinct relationships we will ever have. And no two people will ever have the same relationship with Allah. So comparing ourselves to others is actually quite futile. Each of us is a unique echo in the divine heart. And each of us, at the core of our existence, is a glorious gem within the hidden treasure that wanted to be known through each of our lives. Allah tells us in a hadith Qudsi, I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be known, and so I created creation in order to be known. Another hadith Qudsi tells us about our innate fitrah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the heavens and the earth do not contain me, but the heart of my faithful servant does. So each human being, to quote one of my favorite poets, Shabir Banubai, is a unique filter of divine light. As such, each soul has its own particular and distinctive pathway to Allah in harmony with each person's own nature and constitution. This original divine light cascades through myriad filters and personalities, and in diverse forms, but is never lost. It's within us, between us, seeking to be known and ever present. And it's the true source of our self-knowledge, as well as the basis of our most meaningful relationships. So while we are each unique, particular filters of light, we need to constantly cultivate that distinctiveness with reference to the higher, to the ruhani, to ever expanding forms of virtue, so that we are in alignment with Allah's guidance, rather than to allow our uniqueness to descend into the lower realms of pride and ego and divisive difference. The shadow side, of course, of our uniqueness, our distinctiveness, is when the ego the shadow side of it is embodied in that moment where Iblis refused to bow down to Adam alayhi salam, saying, well, I'm made of fire and he's made of clay. And so he uses his uniqueness to descend rather than ascend. The uniqueness we cultivate and celebrate is of our essence, of our ruh, not of our nafs, not of our ego. If we operate at the ego level, it becomes an issue of arrogance, which we all can easily recognize as spiritual vice. And here I think it's particularly important for those of us that might be in positions of power and privilege in a family, in a community, in an institution, and in a society that can fall easily, we can fall into the trap of ego and of arrogance, and we must refrain from this if we want to grow spiritually. So we recognize that we are each entrusted to cultivate and nurture our relationship with Allah throughout our lives, that it doesn't depend on anyone else, and it cannot be done by anyone else for you. Not a mustard seed's weight of impact do others have on that accountability and responsibility we each have to cultivate our relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As such, we can't abdicate our responsibility. We also can't objectify it into a set of fiqh rules that we can tick off a checklist. We are personally always accountable to the divine presence in everything we are and we do. We are in the presence of the beloved friend with every breath, with every intention, in every relationship, in every action, and of all of who we are in the world. And let us use that fundamental reality to befriend for the rest of this month. Let us engage that reality. And as we immerse ourselves in deepening our practice of salah, of dua, of muhasabah, muraqabah, adhkar, and silence, as well as our ibadah through refining our relationships with friends and our community and transformative social action, we appreciate that each of us has a distinct relationship with our Creator and each have very specific work to do on each of ourselves. What refinement or work might look to one person can look very different to another. Here, befriending yourself is to identify with gentleness one or two things we truly want to cultivate this Ramadan. It might be that we want to deepen an attribute or a quality that we want to strengthen, or a set of habits or negative personal patterns that we want to shift. For some of us, it might mean being more present and compassionate in our interactions with our partners or our family members. Perhaps for others, it might mean moving from talking all the time to listening a little bit more carefully, and to listening in ways that we are genuinely open to hearing, and perhaps even changing a hard and fast idea we might have. For others, it might mean taking stock of an internal negative vice that you want to shift, whether it's miserliness or whether it's greed or envy. For others, perhaps it's a lack of self-worth, of having disproportionate regard for the opinion of others, of not recognizing the tremendous precious treasure that you are fundamentally at the level of your ruh. Maybe for others, it's about being a type A personality, and so one needs to kind of cultivate more conscious patience and kindness, to say and to imbibe the quality of Ya Latif more deeply. Or perhaps even about extending compassion to someone you might actively dislike. For others, it might be becoming more assertive or developing boundaries within certain relationships. Whatever we each decide to focus on or to improve in our character helps us to remove the inner dust and crust of our unique ruh so that it might shine more brightly. So, it's important that we clarify what we want to spend the rest of this month cultivating. For some of us, the focus might be quite clear. We might be quite attuned to our own nature and say, oh, I know exactly what I need to work on for the rest of this month. For us, we might need to, for some others, we might need to be sitting in silence and reflect on that. For others, the easy recipe is ask the people that you live with, but just tell them, be both honest and be gentle at the same time. Let us not think about this month as accelerated ritual practice of simply fasting and counting how many rakahs of Taraweeh we can read and how much Qur'an we are able to recite. If we are able to do so, that's wonderful and it's good and it's important. But for it to be genuinely transformative, it requires our presence and our consciousness. We need to attend to how our ibadah enables us to become better human beings to ourselves and to others. How much our ibadah deepens the divine qualities of compassion, gentleness, care, fairness, justice, and generosity in our lives, and how we embody this meaningfully for others and ourselves. I want to conclude by reminding us that we are each generously gifted with a connection to our Rabb by recalling that beautiful Quranic evocative narrative of the day of Al-Asr, that primordial covenant established between each of us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what has been come to call the day of Mithaq, Yawm al-Mithaq in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked each soul, before we even entered the bodies, when we were purely at the level of soul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your sustainer? And each soul that was ever going to be entering a body at any point replied lovingly, Bala shahidna, indeed, we bear witness that there is no God but God. This very first shahada that each of us has taken, even before entering this life, we have, at the levels of our souls, given a loving pledge that our beings belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah did not command this. Allah asked, and we responded. It's a beautiful relationship of intimate love. And it's quite a horizontal relationship. It's not a vertical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked, am I not? Allah did not command, I am your Lord. Rumi tells us that the divine Al-Asr and the human answer is the seal of the heart, and thus our hearts are forever under the spell of Allah's infinite love and power. Junayd of Baghdad in the 10th century states that deep within ourselves, we each yearn to return to the same state of original oneness with our Creator that existed on the day of Al-Asr, where there was no separation between the divine beloved and each of our souls. May this Ramadan help us to move gently, lovingly, and dedicatedly towards the state of Shahidna. Shahidna ya Rab, Shahidna, Shahidna ya Rab, inshallah. That we are each secure and comforted by the knowledge that all that we need is already imprinted in our hearts before we even got here, through the breathtaking generosity of Allah who is Al-Akram. Ya Allah, Ya Kareem, Ya Rahim, Ya Adl, accept from us all of our highest intentions and help us to become embodiments of your generosity, compassion, and justice. Ya Allah, Ya Noor, Ya Wadud, bathe us in your light, marinate us in your love so that we imbibe beauty in our intentions, our words, and our actions, and our being. Ya Allah, Ya Wahhab, bestow on all of us ease after this time of difficulty, and help each of us to become instruments of your divine beneficence. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions or your reflections. I don't think there's a ready-made answer for that. I think recognizing, I think what is absolutely imperative as a first step is to sit with one's grief. We cannot wish it away. We have to sit with it. We have to both sit with it, surrender it, sit with it, surrender it. And I think, in a kind of immediate sense, part of the grieving is also to create the space for that grief to be, and not to just chase it away. I think it's a very difficult time. And in fact, if we think about it, all of our prophets, all of the Anbiya suffered enormously. It is something, there's some that say that suffering is part of the way in which the soul gets softened. I think there's a lot there. Some of it we want to be able to hold with compassion in ourselves. And then I think we also need to be quite pragmatic about it. We also need to say, well, actually, there's a grieving period, and then there's a period in which we need to be able to move on. And what does that tawakkul entail? And then sometimes if we're struggling still, what resources are available? And who can you draw upon? And what can you do at a very practical level? If you're struggling with depression, one of the things that you need to do is you need to be thinking about exercise despite how you're feeling. You need to be reaching out to people despite your kind of lack of energy. You need to be reaching out to people and seeking out support. So I think there's quite practical means as well. And of course, in all of this, we constantly call on the divine names and ask for assistance. But I don't think there's a shortcut for any of this. I think each of it is quite individual in terms of how we deal with it. But it's absolutely imperative. I mean, what I feel is like often in Ramadan, we all go into fifth gear. And I often, at the end of Ramadan, say, I wish I had done a little bit more. I wanted to do that. I wanted to read one more juz and I didn't finish this. And I'm not sure that that's helpful. All it does at the end of Ramadan is make me feel like inadequate, like I didn't actually get there. Instead of actually being very present to the Qur'an that I am actually reciting, and just say, well, what does it mean for me to breathe this in? So I think breathing in the month with kindness, and so that's why I say we need to befriend ourselves. We need to befriend ourselves in the way that we befriend another. What support do we need? So if your friend came to you and said, I'm suffering with X, Y, and Z, how would you respond to them? And perhaps think about directing some of that gentleness to yourself when you're engaging, the suffering that you've experienced over this period of time. Inshallah. Thank you for that. Any other questions or reflections, Nafisa? Absolutely. It's a very delicate line. I think it's a very delicate balance, because I think it's an excellent question. And I think the question of being, I think if you try, the only way, one mechanism that I've been using of late, because I've recognized that I'm actually quite harsh with myself quite often. And so one of the mechanisms I've used is, I've thought, okay, if this scenario, whatever it is, was brought to me by Nafisa, or somebody that I was, close to, that I cared about, how would I respond to that? And then I respond internally to myself, as I would to Nafisa. Now, a friend is not always going to say, no, it's fine, you're absolutely fine. A good friend would say, yeah, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but maybe you need to be more attentive to X, Y, and Z. So I think it's a question of actually being honest with oneself. Being honest and gentle is that the mizan between those things, I think, is quite important. And I think in our hearts, if we really asked, we'd know when we're being lazy, no? I think we would know, and sometimes you need to give yourself a little bit of latitude, but a little bit of latitude is, this Ramadan, there was one day, I was, alhamdulillah, had some very, very good days, and then one day I was just and I put on Netflix, and then I thought, why am I doing that when I should really actually, and then I thought there was this lovely story of the Sufi teacher that actually, at the end of intense muraqabah and intense sohbah and intense all of that, would put his foot on one of his disciples' laps and say, massage my foot, and then they would all tell bawdy jokes. And I thought, no, this Netflix is my bawdy joke. I just need to chill from having been on intensive, right? Now, on some level, you could say that that's being a little bit lazy, but actually, maybe if you've done a lot of intensive work, you need some, there's qabd and there's bast, then you need a bit of time for when you've been tightly squeezed, so to say, that you need time to relax. I think we have an internal monitor. I think to ask that, to reflect back and to go quite deep and ask, if you feel like you're you're not quite sure what it is that whether you just, yes. And actually, one of the things that I always tell my children is that whenever you feel an uneasiness about something, listen to it. The uneasiness could either be your conditioning that makes you quite rough on yourself, in which case you kind of go, thank you can sit on the side for a while, or the uneasiness is your fitra telling you, that's not good. And so I think we have that access to the fitra. We just need to keep polishing so that we can see it and hear it more carefully. Thank you, Nafisa. Yes. That's a very tough one. I think the thing is that if you're dealing with it on an immediate basis, perhaps what one needs to be attentive to is what is it that will allow you to empty it. In your distinctive, you know your personality and you know your nature. What allows you to do the transition from leaving something behind in a space? I think the suffering of the world in the variety of ways that we encounter it, some of us on a daily basis like you, some of us if we're reading too much of the news, if we're looking at what's going on, some of us in terms of friends that we have or that we ourselves are experiencing some form of intense struggle or even tyranny of sorts. I think, so there's a different way in which each of us might experience that, but I think the question is, how would you enable yourself to disconnect? And what allows you the space? So what is the space between coming home and then for yourself to just say, what do I need to exhale? What do I need to give it up? What do I need to make tawakkul and say, I can't carry? Of course, none of us can carry the pain of all of the people that we encounter. So what are the mechanisms? And there's some beautiful Asma al-Husna. I was actually looking at, I'm in a daily course on Asma al-Husna. You must give me your name. There was a very nice, I'm trying to remember which of the divine names it was, as a repetition to kind of let go of holding pain, others' pain, or the pain of the world. So to do some kind of ritual disconnection on a daily basis, whatever that is, could be quite helpful. But to create that space, I think if you just transition without that and you're like, okay, now I'm supposed to be making dinner and attending to what my kids need or attending to what my partner needs or my mum needs or whatever, then that lack of space for the self is a problem. And it doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out thing. You need to figure out what enables you to move between that space, whether it's just sitting quietly and breathing in, Ya Allah, Ya Haq, Ya Adl, Ya Rahman. If you're just breathing in divine mercy and leaving and giving everything up to that divine mercy, and surrendering it, Ya Wakil, the real trustee. We call upon the quality of Ya Wakil, who is the trustee in all cases. And maybe just a 5 minute of that and then just breathing into that. Could be. So I think one needs to figure out what, you might know for yourself what helps you to disconnect. The question is, do you create time for that disconnection? And you need to prioritize it. It needs not to be, well, I actually don't have time to disconnect. Well, if you don't have time to disconnect, you're taking all of that energy into the next space, which is then even more depleting and not helping anybody at all. So also you need to be clear. I need this space. And what does that mean? Either me, taking a drive somewhere for a half an hour or me sitting in my car or, whatever is doable in that space. But I think it's important to consciously create that space of replenishing. And then, of course, if one is dealing with a lot, you need to figure out what feeds your spirit on a daily basis and just be vigilant about trying to do that. Because if you don't do that, again, one is very easily depleted. So what enables you to give things over more easily to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What practices will give you more strength in ways that are, facilitating? So in some sense, it might sound like I'm saying be more vigilant and do more. But sometimes, you need a certain practice. So maybe for some people it would be, well, I'm going to wake up for 20 minutes earlier and I'm really going to give up the day to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask to be protected and guided in this time. And not just asking it, but like bringing my whole consciousness to that asking and opening myself fully. Ya Fatah, oh Allah, you are the opener. You open. And of course that name of mine, that divine name is very, very beautiful. Ya Fatah, the one who opens, the one who opens. And opens whatever. You don't know what you need to be opened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open it just to ask. Ya Fatah, Ya Mujib. You're the opener, you are the responder to needs. I don't know what I'm asking for and I don't know what I need opening for and I don't know what answers are needed. Ya Fatah, Ya Mujib, Ya Allah. So, yeah, we have a great arsenal, psychological arsenal in the Asma al-Husna. We should spend some time with them. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out and thank you for being here. It's a long weekend, so I'm surprised to even see you here. So, alhamdulillah, thank you for coming. Alhamdulillah.
I want to thank Professor Sadiyya for thought-provoking. It's not informative, it's thought. It moves beyond boundaries, spiritual boundaries. If you're a member of the library, there's a book of Imam al-Ghazali on the 99 names. You should think of taking it out. Brilliant work. I think there are many such books, but Imam Ghazali speaks about, and as Professor Sadiyya said, we have an arsenal of in the 99 names. So when you have time, come in and take that.
Is good, but sometimes he's also a little. His perspectives are also not always resonant with our space and our time. Shaikh Fawzia Rawiya has an extraordinary book on the divine names that I've been in this group where somebody else has been reading, so I need to get that book because it's not easily available here. But she's got the book, and then there's a beautiful book by Sheikh Tosin Bayragh called The Name and the Named also, which has a very beautiful reflection. So I think there's a lot of contemporary teachers. Ghazali is of course a resource for us, but sometimes I think for the more contemporary realities, more contemporary spiritual teachers have a more relevant way that we can. And Fawzia is great because she really speaks about the psychological elements, Sheikh Fawzia. She really speaks about how you can engage with that. I'm thinking there's another book called The Secrets by Halwa. Is that, Nafisa, do you know the name? The Secrets of the Divine Presence, maybe? The Secrets of Divine Love, yes. So that's also, somebody's been reading from in our circle on one of those names, which is also quite beautiful. So I think there's a lot of lovely books out there that we can also use to help us think about how to be engaging some of this stuff.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Secrets of Divine Love. I think it's about 2 years old. It's a very recent publication. Also very contemporary, very brilliant. Very, from the author's perspective, or the compiler's perspective, sort of in her own experience, bringing.
Sorry, there's one other. I buy, every time I go away, I buy 7 copies. I don't know why I get 7 copies each time I go, and each time I give them to people that I love. It's an extraordinary book by this sheikh here, Sheikh Kabir Helminski, who's a Jerahi sheikh who was actually initiated by a whole line of very powerful Turkish teachers. And the book is called The Living Presence. For me, it's distilled probably some of the deepest teachings within the Qur'an and within the tradition in a way that's extremely relevant. It's just the language. The language is so contemporary and so able to speak to our context and our times in ways that are both deeply immersed in the tariqah and in the sharia, but in a way that's just, I think for me it's a very resonant book. So I want to encourage that particular book is really very powerful. It's called The Living Presence by Sheikh Kabir Helminski. Yes, it's the Threshold Society, right? Oh yes, he's available online. Actually, you could even watch quite a lot of him and his wife. His wife's also written a recent book on Maryam alayhi salam, and she's written a lot on Sufi women, actually. Camille and Kabir, yeah. And they have stuff. I don't know about the 19. Do they have a course on it? Or? Okay. 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 Yeah. Yes. And they have wonderful sohbas, like on, I think it's either I watched a few of them, like either the first Sunday of the month or which is also very beautiful, like very practical spiritual advice, very much about, it's not just esoteric, the asma, al-qawi is the strength, but like what does that mean in a living experience? How do I use it when I'm encountering something in my life? Which is wonderful.
Thank you, Professor Sadiyya. So yeah, in the library we have also many other interesting reads. So make your way to the library, and if you're not a member yet, then become a member. It is free reading, you know. It is publicly available, and I think we should encourage people to use the space. We've been successful in many regards, whereby in the afternoon this is a thriving space. In fact, we should tone them down. But to see the young readers flocking in here, like, from about 4 years old till some of the oldies that comes in. So we really want to encourage people. This is a public library. Come along, come in and join. Come and become a member. Come and become a patron of the library. The last 2 years of the pandemic has not been easy. Like many institutions out there, we have been suffering several knocks. We weren't able to do fundraisings or anything like that, and therefore with our pledges on coming now for the end of Ramadan, starting in a couple of hours, we want to encourage people to endow, to contribute. Make this a living space of your memory, of your legacy. We have the book legacy patronage as well, whereby you can donate towards 2 books, 4, 6, or 10 books. But the importance is that we should take ownership and we should do the buy-in into an institution like this, because it is one of the finest. I want to thank our online audience for also taking the time on this very long weekend. It's a long weekend to listen in, to take of the advice and of the sohbah of Professor. We want to thank the audience and Professor from our team, and our chairman, Dr. Ilyas Parker, sends his salams. Him and our treasurer, Anwar Abdurrahman, are currently in the air on Umrah, requesting your du'as for safe journey, safe passage in the bastions of the spiritual lands, and for them to return to us and take the good work further from there. So from our side, we really want to thank you for making this time, this space, this moment available and alive. And we hope that in future we will have some more meaningful talks as was delivered today. I want to thank our audience, our guests here, who took the time to come and share in this. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to end off with, is there any questions before we close down? I'm going to end off with the surah of Wal Asr, and thereon I wish you well. If we do not see each other again, may Laylatul Qadr find you or find us in good state, in good stead, and in good health, and grant shifa for all those who are sick out there, for all those who have lost loved ones, and for all those who just need, like myself, that little bit of encouragement. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr, inna insana fi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minadh dhalimin. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وصحبه وبارك وسلم فضلك دوام فيها سبحانك اللهم تحية فيها السلام وآخر الحمد لله رب العالمين. Shukran for coming, and thank you for joining us, all our online viewers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.